My son sold my 2.8 million ranch and even my late husband's Mustang, then handed me a cold envelope with $10,000 and told me to move on. I felt the shock in my chest but steadied my breath. 67 years of hard work rising like steel in my spine. Instead of crying, I began collecting every slip of paper, every signature building a record no one could erase. That was only the beginning of a long, quiet counterstrike that would test love, law, and legacy. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. The smell of brewed chicory coffee still hung over my kitchen table when I laid out the ranch ledgers like I had every Thursday evening for years. Bills in one stack, receipts in another, a yellow pencil lined up with the edge of the placemat. Numbers had always calmed me. Fence posts hammered into place across a pasture I could count on. Yet tonight a small debit blinked at me from the paper statement, a figure that didn't match any feed run or fence repair. It sat there like a hairline crack in a teacup, barely visible, but impossible to ignore. I circled it twice, my pencil, pressing so hard the paper almost tore. I opened the old desktop computer in the corner of the kitchen, its hum as familiar as the windmill out back. Side-by-side paper and online records should mirror each other. They always had. But row after row of microtransfers sat under a name I didn't recognize, plain forgettable, like a shadow company. I scrolled cross-checking dates. Whoever it was had learned to stay under thresholds like coyotes, slipping through gaps in the fence at night. The unease that began with a single debit deepened into a steady drumbeat of suspicion. My hands stayed steady, but my jaw clenched until it ached. The phone rang just as I printed a screen capture. Caller ID, my bank's main line. Mrs. Hale, a young man's voice said, "I'm calling to confirm the new home equity line you opened this week. We just need to verify the email address." My chair didn't squeak, but inside I jolted as if a gate had slammed. "I haven't opened anything," I said evenly. "Please send me every document you're referring to, PDF and hard copy. Tonight, if possible." He hesitated, then promised to email within the hour. I thanked him, noting the time and his name on a sticky note. While the printer spat out statements, I pulled the deed folder from the sideboard and began highlighting patterns, dates, payees, parcel numbers. Only 3 people had ever had my online password. Only one still lived nearby. Each highlight was a fence stake driven into soft ground. Anger rose quiet and hot, not a shout, but a pilot light. I would not call anyone yet. Documentation first. My pencil tapped the margin like a metronome, keeping time with my breath. Copying parcel IDs triggered a memory Kellen at 12 elbows on this same table, learning how to balance a checkbook under my hand. He had grinned when the numbers matched, proud to be Mom's little accountant. I blinked hard. Memory was evidence, not excuse. Tonight I was still the teacher, but my lesson was to myself. Record, verify, prepare. My eyes moved from the penciled figures to the window where dusk slid down the hills. By 8, I had requested written verification from the bank, drafted an email to my attorney contacts, still unsent, and photographed every ledger page with my phone. I set a reminder to check the county clerk's portal at dawn. The work steadied me. Each click of the stapler was a vow that no one would rewrite my life without leaving a trail I could follow. On the porch, the night wind rattled the front gate. The numbers in my head felt like fence posts, shifted a few inches off their line. I locked the safe, tucked the flash drive into my robe pocket, and sat listening to coyotes yip far off. Sleep would come light and watchful the way it had when my children were small and sick. By dawn, a metal placard would hang on my front gate, 2 red words I never ordered sold. The morning light came in, low and pale across the pastures, turning the dew on the grass into tiny sparks. I stepped out with a bucket of feed balanced against my hip, the same way I had since my husband built this gate 30 years ago. The horses whinnied from the far paddock, but my eyes froze on something new. A heavy metal placard had been bolted to my front gate in the night. Big block letters, bright red, sold. I set the bucket down without spilling a grain and took out my phone. Date time angle close up. My pulse slowed to a deliberate beat. Shock wanted to shake me, but control won. By 7, I was on the road to Fredericksburg, a thermos of coffee and my binder on the seat beside me. Traffic was light. Wildflowers blurred along the shoulders. At the county clerk's office, the fluorescent lights smelled faintly of toner. I requested the morning filings for my parcel. The clerk handed over a single sheet, and there it was, a new transfer document recorded just before closing yesterday. My name was on it, my ranch's legal description, but not my signature. A dull heat rose under my collar. Betrayal in black ink filed before I even locked my safe last night. I scanned the document again and stopped at the heading. My name, Marjorie Hale, had been spelled Hale, the E faint, the I missing. It was the kind of typo no banker would make, but a forger might. The detail clicked with the bank call from last night. Relief threaded through the suspicion a mistake like this could be a lifeline. I snapped discrete photos of every page, including the filing stamp. "Could I have certified copies, please?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. While the machine clacked, I jotted parcel IDs, instrument numbers, and the deputy clerk's initials. My phone buzzed with a message from the bank, but I didn't open it yet. Documentation first. Kellen's name stayed unspoken, but my pen pressed hard enough to dent the paper. As the clerk returned the stamped copies, she mentioned almost offhand a man who had rushed in late yesterday with a stack of papers. Looked like he'd driven a long way. She said kept checking his watch. I smiled politely, thanked her, and tucked the detail away without showing a flicker of what it meant to me. Contained anger is a tool. Loose anger is a trap. Driving back, the metal sign still glared from my gate. I parked, got out, and studied it. Heavy gauge steel professional lettering drilled holes aligned with my husband's old screw marks. The wind pressed the placard against the bars like a hand. I remembered him welding this gate in the summer heat, his forearms brown and strong, telling me it would outlast both of us. I ran a finger over the cool letters and kept my voice steady. Planning mode was stronger than nostalgia. Inside my office, I spread the photos. Certified documents and sticky notes on a corkboard I labeled Timeline in bold black marker. Patterns began to form, dates, filings, calls. Tomorrow morning, I would call Astria Finch, the attorney whose card still sat in my Rolodex. Tonight, I would build my case in silence. Determination settled on my shoulders like a work jacket. I had taught my son to build fences. Now I was learning how to take them down quietly. Morning light slid through the kitchen blinds in thin golden bars touching the corkboard where last night's certified copies hung. I set my coffee mug down and glanced at the board parcel numbers, filing stamps, the word "sold" scrawled in my handwriting, but something else sat on the table. A thick cream-colored envelope with my name typed neatly across the front. No stamp, no return address. The horses nickered outside, waiting for breakfast, but I stayed still. My fingers hovered above the flap. A courier must have left it at dawn. The room smelled of paper and coffee. My pulse rose like a slow drum. I broke the seal with the edge of my nail. Inside lay a cashier's check for $10,000 and a typed note. Use this to transition gracefully. That was all. No signature. The paper trembled slightly in my hand, though not from weakness. $10,000 to vanish from a $2.8 million ranch. My breath came steady but deep, as if I were lifting a heavy saddle. I placed the check back in its envelope and took a photo of it on the table ruler beside it for scale date and time stamped. Hurt moved through me like cold water, but anger burned underneath, hotter and steadier than coffee on the stove. I needed air. Walking into the garage, I flicked on the light out of habit. My late husband's 1968 Mustang should have been gleaming in its bay, dusted once a week, even now. Instead, there was an empty rectangle of concrete, the faint outline of tire tracks, and a patch of dust where the hood had rested. My phone camera caught the absence angles, close-ups, VIN plate missing from the workbench. The loss landed deeper than the check. That car was our memorial, not an asset. For a moment, I closed my eyes and saw him again, sleeves rolled grease on his arms, teaching Kellen to tighten a bolt. Saturday afternoon's radio low, the three of us sharing iced tea as chrome caught the sun. Back then, I thought we were building a future together. Now it was evidence of how far we'd drifted. I opened my eyes. Memory was a thread, but steel ran inside it. I called my contact at the local DMV from the kitchen phone. She owed me a favor from a tax assessment dispute years ago. "Can you check a VIN for me?" I read it off my notes. A pause, then her voice dropped. The title had been transferred yesterday to an LLC linked to someone with Kellen's partner's last name, date buyer name, and VIN went onto a fresh, sticky note. "Thanks," I said quietly and hung up. Cold determination replaced the ache. I drove to the edge of town to a small car lot tucked behind an old feed store. Behind a row of SUVs sat the Mustang hood down a not-for-sale sign on its windshield. My hand stayed at my sides while my phone took photo after photo. The clerk, a young man with sunburned cheeks, stepped out. "Nice car," I said. "Owner must be proud." He grinned. "Your son was here yesterday, talked about fixing it up." He didn't know he'd just handed me another piece of the puzzle. Contained fury rose in me like heat under a lid, but my smile held. Back home at sunset, I pinned the envelope, the check copy, and the Mustang photos on the corkboard next to the property documents. The board had become a map of erasures. On my laptop, I began drafting a chronological timeline, each entry. A fence post, driven deep. The ache of loss settled, but resolve began to rise steady as a river behind a dam. I wasn't just losing things, I was being erased, and I wasn't going to let it continue. The packet was waiting on my front knob like a verdict. Glossy, cheerful, rubber-banded tight, it carried my name and the ranch address as if it outranked me. Westridge Retirement Village, the cover announced in meadow green letters. Inside a letter referenced a family tour request scheduled for tomorrow at 10. I stood on the porch while the wind flipped the pages. Smiling couples strolled under pergolas. Not one photo showed a pasture fence or a mud boot. I carried the packet to the kitchen, set it beside the kettle, and washed my hands as if the paper were a raw onion. The phone rang before the water steamed. A bright woman introduced herself as a Westridge representative, just confirming your tour, Ms. Hale. She knew my full legal name and the time. "Your son said you like mornings." She added, "friendly as rain on a tin roof." I kept my voice level. I didn't book a tour. A pause, then soft shoes in a hallway and a script about aging safely in seamless transitions. I asked for her last name, direct line, and the referral source. She offered the first two and slid past the third. I wrote everything. Okay. At the kitchen table, I triaged the mess. The brochure, the county copies, the photos of the sold placard, the snapshots of my husband's Mustang behind the lot fence, everything lined up in parallel columns. I labeled a new one, Outsourcing Mother. Under it, I listed who contacted me, who presumed to speak for me, and the claims they had placed in the world. I was not ranting. I was building a road. The corkboard had begun to look like a county map of my own life, every pin a boundary marker saying, "I am still here." An email arrived with the flat chime of trouble. Subject, "You should see this." The sender name was a scramble of letters. Inside were PDFs, a draft deed transfer bearing a date 2 weeks out, a care plan memo with notes about move-in coordination, and a scanned signature that wore my loops and angles like a borrowed dress. Beneath the files, a single line, "I can't watch this happen." No greeting, no goodbye. The jolt came first, then the steadying calm that arrives when a threat turns visible. I saved the attachments twice, once to the laptop and once to a clean USB. I drove into Fredericksburg and took a corner table near the outlet at a coffee shop that smelled like warm sugar and beans. I downloaded the files again to a fresh USB, printed 2 copies of each document, and checked the metadata, created dates, user initials, the development company that had routed the draft deed. I circled the initials with a pen until the ink sank through the paper. The barista wiping a nearby table asked if I was doing okay. "I'm making sure my own name still belongs to me," I said. She nodded like someone who had seen things go missing before. Back home, I set the prints under a lamp and compared the forged signature to my passport. My real M curls from habit. The forgery hesitates at the turn, like a horse that doesn't know the gate. I photographed both with a ruler beside them and pinned the rep's name, the burner email, the routing initials, and the brochure under a header. I wrote in thick marker chain of custody. Then I drafted a reply to the anonymous sender, "Thank you," requesting a quick call from a blocked number. No names, only dates, documents, and who touched what. I called Westridge and reached the general voicemail. I stated my name, my ranch address, the time, and the rep's line. "I do not consent to any scheduling or services," I said. "Remove my information from all marketing lists. Confirm by email." I repeated the message and asked for the recording reference number. When I hung up, I logged each detail as if branding a calf, swift, precise, permanent. The house was quiet except for the ice maker, and somewhere outside, a hawk rode its high note over the pasture. Evening settled on the porch in a warm blue. I set the brochures beneath a paperweight shaped like a longhorn, the same one my husband used to keep pasture maps from sliding in the breeze. The gate rattled once and stilled. I pressed my palm flat on the brochure's glossy cover until my skin took back its steadiness. Tomorrow, I would choose my lawyer, not my room. I locked the door, turned off the porch light, and let the dark be simple walls roof a woman still standing where she belongs. Before I closed the ledger, I drew a line down a yellow pad and titled 2 columns, Promise and Proof. Under Promise, I copied the phrases used on me this week, Transition Safety Family Tour Care Plan. Under Proof, I listed stamps, parcel numbers, email headers, and the angle of that hesitant M that betrayed the forger's hand. I added the bank's call from 2 nights ago and the clerk's casual remark about a man rushing papers at the end of the day. I wrote the misspelling of my name in block letters because it had already saved me once. Next to tomorrow, I wrote 1 task higher counsel, who knows fences and fraud in that order. When I stepped outside, night insects started their thin orchestra and train horn lifted from town. I checked the safe, tested the deadbolt, and stood a minute by the window. Out past the oak, the fence line ran straight posts, true wire singing in the breeze. Fences keep cattle where they belong and mark where promises end. I spoke the boundary aloud for myself. If for no one else, I am not moving. I am not for sale. I am not going quietly. The lobby of the title company buzzed like a beehive with carpeting. Phones chirped. Printers sighed. Framed photos of closing day smiles lined the walls, all ribbon bows and keys on fobs. I signed the visitor sheet and told the receptionist I was there to verify tax parcel references on a rural tract, which was true enough to pass. She pointed me to a side counter with clipboards and a dish of pens that wrote too smooth. I stood with my purse against my hip and watched the choreography runners, in and out couriers with tubes, a young clerk hustling a thick folder that bulged like a loaf. When he set it too close to the counter's ledge, gravity voiced an opinion. A thin blue slip slid out, skated to my shoe, and rested there as if it had been looking for me all morning. He didn't notice. He was already paging a notary. I bent to tie a lace that did not need tying and read what the world had let fall at my feet. The slip was a buyer-seller routing note parcel ID track description and a receiving entity, an LLC with a Sunbelt name that wasn't from our county. In the margin, someone had scribbled initials I recognized from the forged deed draft. My phone was already in my hand as I palmed the paper, framing a neat, innocuous photograph that included the counter's wood grain for scale. Dates, time, stamps, a file number, and a note family expedited were all right there, like nails lined in a tidy box. Below, a contact development coordinator, same surname as Kellen's partner. The clerk swept the folder back and the slip with it, never seeing the small mirror I'd already made. "Do y'all handle many rural properties?" I asked, still looking at the framed smiles. The clerk said yes. Families were right-sizing kids, helping parents move closer to services. I asked where the tax parcels usually got verified and how deed drafts moved to closing. "Oh, it can be quick," he said. "Sometimes same week if family's on board." I gave him the kind of smile that means nothing. He offered me a brochure about wire safety. I took it, thanked him, and walked out with my calm folded tight and my fax sitting bright in the phone's gallery, a little lantern I could light when needed. In the truck, the air conditioner coughed dust and cold both. I set the phone on the passenger seat and rehearsed how to put the morning into sentences that aimed straight, not wide. Parcel ID linked to an LLC. Routing initials match the forged draft. Note about family expedited. Contact tied to Kellen's partner. No speculation, only bone. I drove the few blocks to Astria Finch's office, a narrow space wedged between a barber and a shop that sold feed sack aprons. Through the glass, I could see her books stacked like bricks and the green banker's lamps that made every page look deliberate. Astria took my folder and my phone and read without commentary. She tapped the printed PDFs from the anonymous email, then the photo of the buyer, slip, then my passport signature, her gaze a carpenter's square. "This is not clumsy," she said at last. "It's coordinated." She asked for a timeline, and I slid over my yellow pad columns, promise and proof. She nodded. "Good. We'll add a third pressure." Then she laid out a move I hadn't considered. "We freeze the board," she said. 15% of the ranch transfers into a conservation easement under a grantee you trust. Once recorded, any sale must honor the easement's terms. It kills the fast flip math. She looked at me over the rims of her glasses. "Who do you trust to hold that stake and keep quiet until we file Seraphine?" I said. The name surprised me, but it didn't. My daughter-in-law had always handled truth like something you don't drop two hands' eyes aware. Astria nodded. "We'll draft tonight. No warnings, no speeches. We file first, then speak." She wrote the steps in clean lines, easement deed notice to the title company letter to the bank fraud unit preservation injunction if needed. "Expect blowback," she added. "Silence is armor until the record book binds." Relief moved through my chest like a door opening to air I recognized. Agency feels like oxygen when you've been breathing smoke. Sun had shifted west by the time I reached the ranch. Seraphine pulled up an hour later in her dusty crossover hair, up shoes, practical eyes taking in my face, before the porch. We sat where the boards creak a friendly note. I explained the strategy without adjectives, showing her the photo of the slip, the forged signature, the routing initials. I told her what Astria proposed, a quiet 15% into a conservation easement, her as grantee filings timed before anyone could counterfile. "If you agree," I said, "you'll be named. It won't make you popular." She didn't answer at first. She studied the USB in my palm like a tablespoon of mercury. Then she took it and slid it into the inner pocket of her jacket. "Marjorie," she said, "I married into this family, not into a hustle. Tell me where and when." I felt the board beneath my feet settle the way a post sits when the hole is tamped right. When the crickets started their steady commentary, we moved inside and spread my notes under the lamp. I wrote the tasks in quiet ink, sign easement draft, schedule notary, file at clerks at 8 sharp, email title company after the stamp, notify bank fraud with attachments, hold any calls from Kellen until filings are live. The corkboard got a new card, intervene, and I pinned it high where I'd see it before coffee. I realized I'd crossed a line without ceremony. The week had begun with counting losses. Now I was setting terms. The ranch breathed its evening breath through the screens. I counted my own slow, then steady. If a fence had been built around me, I had measured it, mapped the posts, and located the gate. I walked Seraphine to her car. We didn't hug. We agreed on a time, a place to park the order of steps. "No texts," I said. "Paper only in hand." She agreed. When her taillight slipped down the lane, the porch returned to its old quiet. I checked the safe, set the USB duplicate beside the Longhorn paperweight, and put the Westridge brochure underneath everything where it could do no more harm than make the stack level. In the ledger under proof, I added one more line buyer slip photo initials, match LLC identified. Under pressure. I wrote a fresh word countermeasure. I capped my pen and listened to the house speak the way houses do, settling joists, humming wires, the clean click of a lock well turned. Out on the road, a truck passed its headlights sketching the gate's crossbar against the dark. I pictured the sold placard and felt no flinch. That sign was a sentence someone tried to write for me. Tomorrow, the record book would meet my handwriting instead. I turned off the lamp, left the corkboard glowing in a square of moon, and told the room the only vow I could keep without help: I would be precise. I would be patient. I would be heard when it counted, and only then. This time I wasn't watching the trap close on me, I was setting one of my own. Seraphine came after dark with her shoes in her hand so the boards wouldn't speak. We met in the ranch office with only the desk lamp on a cone of light over papers and the corkboard map of my life. She set her keys down, then a thumb-sized drive wrapped in masking tape. "I didn't want to text this," she whispered. "I've been collecting things." I peeled the tape, feeling more like a nurse than a detective. "What kind of things?" "Emails," she said, "from the development people. Memos. Drafts they sent Kellen to sign. He used our home Wi-Fi a few times. I saved whatever I could before I stopped sleeping. The old spare laptop still ran like a stubborn mule, but it had no cloud backups, and that was a virtue tonight." I plugged in the USB and the screen shook awake. Folders bloomed. Routing, drafts, signatures, water. I opened water. There it was, a memo about carving out our water rights and assigning them to an LLC, with the same Sunbelt name I'd seen on the buyer's slip. A line item mentioned expedited consent via familial authority. They had used a family to call a theft polite. We read in silence side by side the way people stare at an ultrasound and pretend they already know the face. Spreadsheets with parcel IDs, a calendar for filings, and a scan where my name bent wrong like a knee turned sideways. Each file I copied to the desktop, then to a fresh USB I labeled with a strip of painter's tape "Ranch Hold." I took photographs of the screen with my phone as if paper and pixels might cancel each other's risks. "It's more than one move," I said. "They're dismantling value piece by piece." Seraphine nodded, jaw set. "Then we build a wall they can't paint over." I called Astria on the landline we keep for storms. She answered on the second ring, her voice already in work mode. I laid out the pieces, the whistleblower PDFs. The buyer slipped the water memo, the forged bend, to my name. She listened, then said, "We'll file the conservation easement and a partial transfer before the clerk takes her first sip of coffee." She paused. "We'll affix a red seal my office mark so anyone moving papers after today trips a hold. It's not magic, it's notice, but it slows a fast. What do you need from me?" "Signatures ID and the promise not to telegraph a thing. Meet me at the courthouse at 7:45. We hung up. I made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon. Seraphine and I went through the packet she'd smuggled out of anxiety and into purpose. We listed questions for Astria on a yellow card water rights lane notice requirements, whether the easement protected not just land, but view and stream. I packed the passport, the deed, and the USB twins. We didn't speak Kellen's name. I think we both understood the only words that mattered were those a clerk would stamp. Dawn was the color of an unpolished coin when we parked 2 blocks from the courthouse. The building looks like a courthouse is supposed to look: columns, clocks, steps that make you breathe. Astria was already on the bench, a leather folio on her lap, her hair in a neat twist that said nothing about sleep. Inside the clerk's office smelled of toner and lemon cleaner. We filled the counter with order easement deed, naming Seraphine as grantee, a partial transfer reserving my control the exhibits that's filed, the clerk said, voice administrative and kind at once. She stamped dates that would outlast our breath and slid copies back through the slot. Any future conveyance will ping this packet. Title companies will call before they sneeze. I thanked her without telling her why my hands shook. Control is a quiet heat. It rises to the eyes but doesn't spill. We stepped into the records room to check the index. There it was, already cascading through the ledger system. My ranch, a new book, and page Seraphine's name, spelled clean. The water rights memo would now meet a door that said not yet. Back at the ranch, the gate still wore its insult in red, but the house felt different, like a violin tuned after humming sharp for too long. Seraphine and I stood at the corkboard and pinned a round red sticker in the center, a dot that meant we had set something true in the world. "Now we wait," I told my granddaughter when she wandered in, rubbing her eyes a little, witness to grown folks' paperwork. She asked if waiting was hard. "Only when you forget you're choosing it," I said. I cleaned the office the way you clean after guests you wanted to impress cords, coiled pens capped files squared. In the ledger, I drew a line between observing and acting and wrote today's date under the second column. It is a small miracle to feel your spine stiffen from the inside. I poured the coffee we hadn't finished into the sink, watching dark water curve like a creek after rain, and wondered how long before the phone would ring with someone else's surprise. Night came back gentle. I walked the porch once, checking latches with the back of my hand. The wind had the smell of cedar and hot metal. Out beyond the barn, a coyote called, and another answered a reminder that presence can be fierce without show. I lay down with my boots by the bed and my purse under the chair. If the house needed me, I would hear it. If my name needed me, the record book would speak first. For the first time in weeks, the ranch felt like mine again, even if only on paper. The night kept counsel. I exhaled. The certified letter arrived just before noon, handed to me by the same rural mail carrier who had delivered feed catalogs for years. The envelope was heavy cream stock, its typewritten address slightly off-center. Inside, a bold header read, "Notice of breach of trust ordering me to vacate within 10 days or face legal action." The letterhead bore a firm's name I didn't recognize, and in the corner, the watermark bled faintly where it should have been crisp. I ran my thumb over the seal, thinking of the red sticker Seraphine and I had pinned on our corkboard. This wasn't a legal summons. It was an attempt to scare me out of my own home. I logged the date, and time in my notebook took photos of every page and placed the envelope under a glass paperweight shaped like a longhorn. My heart beat slow but deliberate anticipation, not panic. Over dinner that evening, Seraphine and I sat at the kitchen island, the smell of stew softening the edge of the day. "They're trying to push you," she said, tapping the forged letter with a fork handle. "We can push back." I slid a legal pad toward her and drew a small triangle information timing control. Our plan was simple: feed a piece of false information about a supposed hidden buyer to see who leaked it. If the rumor came back in altered documents, we'd know exactly which channel Kellen's partner was using. Seraphine listened carefully, her dark eyes steady. "I can mention it casually if I run into him," she said. "Make it sound like gossip." I nodded, but only once. "And watch what he says." We clinked our spoons like a pact. 2 afternoons later, she happened to stop at a coffee shop on the edge of town where Kellen's partner liked to meet vendors. I stayed at the ranch phone on silent, imagining her crossing the parking lot in her denim jacket. Through the cracked window of her car, she told me later she'd murmured just enough of New York investors sniffing around for bulk water rights. The partner's eyes had flicked up fast. Then he'd forced a smile. "Really? Well, these things happen." He left with his coffee half finished. She texted me a single word bitten before pulling onto the highway. Back at the ranch that evening, I powered up the old laptop tied to the cloned USB. By the glow of the screen, I watched document edits in real time. Within hours, a new draft contract appeared in the LLC folder, referencing a competing buyer and shifting the water rights clause, the same bait we dangled. My pulse quickened, not from fear, but from quiet triumph. Our trap had a heartbeat now. Sure enough, the retaliation deepened by midnight. Astria forwarded me a notice of an emergency motion filed to challenge the Red Seal easement. "They're moving faster," she wrote, "but so are we." She attached a draft counterfiling ready to go at dawn. I leaned back in my chair, eyes on the corkboard filled with dates and arrows. For weeks I'd been reacting. Now I was predicting. I spent the next hour drafting a sworn affidavit. Line by line, I described the forged signature evidence, attached photos, and cross-referenced email timestamps from Seraphine's USB. I encrypted the packet and sent it to the state attorney's office, not public, yet just on record. "We're not running," I told Seraphine when she peeked in. "We're building a record." She smiled faintly, the kind that hides steel. Later, alone in my office, I stared at the corkboard. Once it had been a patchwork of lost envelopes, photos, placards. Now it looked like a map. This fight wasn't just about land anymore. It was about my name, my signature, my story. I felt steadier than I had in weeks, as if the floorboards of the ranch had shifted back under my feet. By nightfall, the house was quiet. The windows rattled softly with hill country wind. I closed my notebook and whispered to no one. By the time they realize it will be too late. Out beyond the porch light, the gate creaked as if in agreement. By nightfall, their trap had sprung and they didn't even know it yet. Kellen's text called it family dinner. I drove alone to his suburban Austin house at dusk headlights, sliding over identical lawns. The driveway overflowed with unfamiliar cars, the kind with temporary plates and tinted glass. Porch lights burned like stage lamps. I parked on the street, breathed once, and carried in a pecan pie I didn't bake. The entry smelled of lemon cleaner and reheated brisket. Place cards waited on a long dining table. A pen lay beside a cream folder like a trap set with good linen. Inside, everyone stood a little too straight. Kellen's partner hovered near the folder. A senior living representative, polite blazer-polished smile introduced herself with rehearsed gentleness. "We're all here because we love you," she began, and then the word intervention. They wanted me to sign a release so my transition could be graceful. I kept my voice even. "Let's make sure we agree on what release means." The rep outlined liability. The partner talked about timelines and stress reduction. I nodded the way you nod at a rattlesnake slowly watching the head. I set my purse by the chair and with one practiced gesture pressed record on my phone. It lay open like a placemat, the camera eye tucked into the leather seam. I took the seat they'd chosen and drew the folder closer. The top page wore my name with the same old wound. One letter transposed the misspelling that had already betrayed them in county records. "You typed my name wrong," I said softly, and watched the partner's jaw flicker. I wrote the time in my notebook and underlined it twice. Controlled fury has a quiet temperature. I spoke about legacy the way my husband spoke about weather, plainly with respect. "This land knows our seasons," I said. Calving drought, the years when fences needed more than wire, they needed hands. I thanked them for their concern and asked questions that sounded like gratitude. "Who drafted these? How did you arrive at that valuation? When did you meet together?" I let the answers collect on the recorder rope spinning from their own words. The rep said yesterday. The partner said last week. Kellen said nothing. Eyes on the pen like it might jump into my hand. When the rope was long enough, I opened my satchel and laid out my papers. Certified copies. The red seal filing. A printed chain of edits from a mirrored USB. Photos of the sold placard and the forged signature beside my passport. I did not raise my voice. I pointed. This date precedes that date. Tap. This initial doesn't match. Tap. And this water rights clause quotes language from an email sent at 10:14 p.m. I turned the screen toward them, metadata bright as noon. The room made a small sound, chairs breathing someone's throat, catching like wind hitting a gate. The partner spoke first something about misunderstanding and legal gray. His confidence thinned like cheap paint under rain. Kellen pushed his chair back, but the rep, suddenly less cheerful, lifted a hand. "We can fix this quietly," she said, as if the table were a patient. I kept my gaze on my son. "No more quiet fixes," I said. "No more rooms where my name gets edited while I pour the coffee." The pen that had waited for me rolled to the edge and stopped against my folder, a tiny verdict made of plastic and gravity. I let the quiet do its work. In it, I felt the click inside me, the shift from defense to offense, from holding ground to choosing it. My land, my name, my story. For weeks, I had been learning their map. Tonight, I drew my own. I gathered the pages and slid them back into the satchel, not because I was retreating, but because the moment had finished its work. The recorder breathed in my purse. "For the record, I said you attempted to move property without authority, to misstate my identity, and to present forged material for signature. Here's what happens next," I continued. "You will receive copies through counsel. If you contact me about signatures or occupancy, that communication will be logged and forwarded. If you wish to speak as family, you may do so after the record is complete." I straightened my chair, set the pen upright, and stood. "We are done for tonight. No one told me to sit down." I placed the pie on the counter like a tip for service I did not receive. The hallway was long enough to make a decision in. I made one I would not explain myself in rooms arranged to erase me. At the door, I paused, hand on the knob, and looked back once, not at their faces, but at the folder now closed. You can cover a thing without changing it. Under a thin layer of dust, the brand is still there. Night air met me on the porch, warm and clean after the lemon gloss inside. At the curb, unfamiliar cars lined the street like rented opinions. I set the pie on the passenger seat and started the truck. The engine idled with the patience that had pulled hay wagons and carried us through lean years. In the rearview mirror, the dining room window was a pale rectangle. Shapes moved behind the curtain, smaller now that they were far away. I drove home by muscle memory, the highway a ribbon I knew blind, past the feed store, past the billboard that once promised lakeside villas, past the field where blue bonnets were thinking about blooming. The ranch gate greeted me with iron scroll work and the memory of my husband's welding mask flashing in summer dusk. I parked, carried the pie inside, and set it on the counter, untouched. Then I went to the office and pinned one more card to the corkboard dinner recorded. I wrote the time, the names, present the phrases they offered: transition, graceful release. I poured water, not whiskey, and stood at the window. Coyotes called beyond the creek. I thought of my boy on a three-legged stool, boots not yet touching the floor. He had once been patient with wire, careful with knots. I do not know when his hands learned different work. I do know mine have not forgotten. The wind pressed the screen, then eased. Somewhere a hinge complained and went still. When I left that table, they weren't family, they were defendants in waiting. Morning came like a verdict. The house was quiet except for the tick of the kitchen clock and the far bawl of a calf just weaned. My head argued with the sunrise. I made coffee, then stood before the corkboard, the red seal filing pinned square. As a badge, certified copies layered like shingles, a small recorder in its cradle with twin backups on a labeled USB. The timeline I'd drawn last night had hardened. I traced each date with a fingertip the way you check fence posts after a storm, feeling for looseness you can't afford to ignore. The phone rang before I finished the first cup. Blanco County Sheriff's Office. A steady voice said, "Ma'am, this is a courtesy call. We've received a complaint and a counter-complaint, naming you and members of your family. You can come in or send counsel. My thumb found a pen. Case number." He read it off. I repeated it back and wrote the time in the margin. "Thank you," I said. "My counsel will respond." I logged the caller's name, the extension, even the faint line crackle, as if I were counting cattle at dusk. When he hung up, the house seemed to hold its breath and wait for mine. I put Astria on speaker. She listened, then went brisk. "You don't go in alone. I'll file a notice of representation and send them the clip where the partner says he prepared the forms before you consented." I heard keys tapping paper, sliding. "If anyone shows up, call me first, then that deputy." Her calm steadied me the way a hand on the neck settles a skittish mare. We confirmed the facts, matched them to the timeline, and hung up. I looked out the window. A hawk rode a thermal over the hayfield patient, untroubled by the noise below. By mid-morning, the bank called. The branch manager sounded like a man trying to keep water inside a leaky bucket. "Ms. Hale, an incoming wire associated with a development LLC tied to your parcel has been frozen pending documentation inconsistencies." He cleared his throat. "If you have any title defects you can share, I'll route them to compliance. You'll want file numbers only," I said, and gave him the public references and the red seal recordation. "That will do," he said, sounding relieved and worried at the same time. When we ended the call, I wrote his name on a sticky note and added it to the map of what this had become. After that, the ringing didn't stop. Kellen's partner called 3 times. I let each one slide into voicemail so the machine could do the listening for me. A text from Kellen hit like hail on tin. "We need to fix this before it ruins me." I typed and erased 3 replies, then sent none. Instead, I forwarded the message to Astria with a single line, "For the record." I opened the freezer, took out a loaf of last summer's zucchini bread, and set it to thaw. Comfort you can measure in slices is not a bad plan when the day measures you back. The side gate clicked around noon. Martha from the next ranch stepped in with a carton of eggs and yesterday's paper. "You look like you slept on a question," she said, setting both on the counter. I told her only what ethics and kindness allowed. Color left her face and then returned as something sturdier. "Well, that explains why the surveyors vanished from your north fence before sunup. Title office is scrubbing files. Folks are suddenly real busy avoiding eye contact." She squeezed my hand. About time they met the real you. I thanked her and walked her to the door. Dust rose under her tires and settled slow like a curtain closing on Act 1. I spent the afternoon in the office sending what needed sending and saving what needed saving. I labeled folders like trail signs, Sheriff Bank Title Audio. I printed the call log and taped it to the wall, then walked the hallway to feel the house under my feet. In the bedroom, my husband's belt still hung on the bedpost, the leather shaped by years of work. I touched it and felt the ache rise and pass like a summer squall. Loss had taught me not to beg storms to change direction. You plan your cover tie down what can blow, and you wait them out. Near dusk, I carried a chair to the porch and counted costs. Statements, depositions, maybe court. The Mustang's buyer to be found and questioned. A son who may not know how to apologize in a way that could be received. I set one rule for myself out loud so the wind could witness it. I will not be cornered again by love or fear. The cottonwoods answered with a dry applause. Down by the creek, a frog started up, unconcerned with human quarrels. I stood at the sink and watched a thin line of ants find sugar I didn't remember spilling. They carried it away grain by grain, doing what needed doing without complaint. That felt like the job in front of me. Quiet labor, repeated, patient. Not vengeance, not spectacle. Just the steady work of putting my name back where it belongs. Just so. The phone lit again. I turned it face down and set the recorder face up. Tomorrow might bring a deputy at the gate or a process server on the road. It might bring nothing but more calls and the slow work of honesty finding daylight. Either way, I would meet it standing. I dimmed the kitchen light and the house exhaled, wood-settling pipes ticking like old bones remembering dance steps. Outside, the last of the sun caught the red seal still pinned to the timeline, and for a moment the paper looked like a small flag refusing to fall. I locked the office, slid the recorder into my purse, and set the phone beside it. If they come tomorrow, I told the quiet room they'll meet both. Then I washed the breakfast cup, turned the deadbolt, and listened until the ranch told me it was safe to sleep. The dog barked before I heard tires on the gravel. I set down the dish towel and stepped onto the porch as a tidy vintage truck rolled to my gate. A man in a pressed work shirt climbed out, hat in hand, the kind of polite that has nothing to prove. "Miss Hale," he called. "Name's Warren Harrington. I believe I bought a car that wasn't for sale." He held up a folder, tabs, neat receipts clipped. The dog settled at my heel. "Come on up," I said. "Coffee's on and so is the truth." He nodded and took the steps like a man entering a courtroom he respected. We sat at the porch table. He slid me a copy of a cashier's check for $20,000, a bill of sale, with my Mustang's VIN and a text thread with Kellen's partner, promising delivery post-title confirmation. I let the papers breathe on the wood between us, then turned my binder so he could see the red seal filing and the conservation easement that had gone in before any deal could have been real. Mr. Harrington. I said the car was never Kellen's to sell. It sits in my name and under my roof. He read quickly and well, lips pressing as dates and initials lined up the way fence posts do when a straight eye sets them. "Ma'am," he said, "I don't want what isn't mine. I want what's right." Gravel spat behind us. Kellen's SUV swung into the drive like the land still answered to him. He jumped out, already talking. "Mom, you don't understand the arrangement Mr. Harrington let me explain." I did not stand. "You will speak to Mr. Harrington as a man who took his money," I said, "not to me." He stopped caught between the folder and the fact of me. Warren rose only an inch from his chair. "Son, I collect cars." "Not excuses," he said. "Your paperwork leaks." Kellen's eyes went to the binder's red seal and then to the recorder lying openly beside the sugar bowl. My phone vibrated. An email from the county district attorney acknowledged receipt of materials from Astria, requested formal statements, and assigned a case number that read like a hinge swinging shut. I forwarded it to Warren with a single line, "For your file then to Kellen without comment." "What is that?" Kellen asked. "Due process," I said. "You'll meet it." Warren exhaled as if a weight had finally said its name. "Ms. Hale," he murmured, tapping the bill of sale. "I'll take that statement when you're ready." The next call came from the title underwriter. Given the conservation easement and the DA inquiry, the woman said we're withdrawing. "Any further movement on that parcel will flag." I repeated her words for the recorder. Kellen went pale in stages like a porch left in shade. Warren eased back in his chair. "Looks like the deal's spoiled at the root," he said. The dog huffed as if agreeing. "There will be no shouting on my porch," I added because the air had started to tighten. "We'll use pens and dates, not volume." Kellen's jaw worked, but no sentence chose him. I brought out a notary stamp and a clean page. In block letters, I wrote a sworn statement. The VIN dates the text of the offer, the fact that I never authorized transfer or sale, and the morning I discovered the car missing. Kellen stood off to the side, hands clenched and empty. "You taught me to close gaps in a fence," I said without turning. "You should have known how this gap would close." I slid the page to Warren, then signed under oath before the camera on my phone. He tried to press 2 20s into my hand for the notary fee. I closed his fingers back around them. "Your anger belongs in the right direction," I said. He rose with dignity intact. "I'll pursue a refund," he said, glancing once at Kellen, "from the party who took my money." The dog tracked him to the gate and returned. Gravel settled. Cicadas lifted their thin saws as if cutting the evening into manageable pieces. Martha came by with a paper sack of peaches and 2 jokes about men who forget receipts until you need them. We shelled pecans while the sky lowered to purple. "I want my son to do right," I said, "and I need him to be made to." Martha nodded. "You taught him to be strong," she said. "Now teach him to be accountable." We did not say how hard that lesson lands when love is the first language. When she left, I wrote 2 envelopes by hand, one to the DA, one to the sheriff, each holding my statement dates and a list of recordings. I set them on the hall table where Kellen used to drop report cards and muddy marbles. In the office, I labeled a new folder price because that's what was coming due for all of us. I powered down the laptop, checked the locks, and walked the length of the house, listening to it answer back with the small ticks and sighs of a place that has learned how to keep. The dog settled by the door as if he understood that keeping now required witnesses as well as keys. On the porch, I sat a while longer, counting small victories, a paused wire, a buyer who knew the truth, a case number that would not vanish with dusk. Anger tried to rehearse scenes. I let it pass like weather. What stayed was the rule I had set: no more corners, not by family, not by fear. The wind carried the smell of cedar and hot iron from the gate. Far away, a train laid down its quiet line of warning. I went inside, sealed the envelopes, and placed them with the morning's outgoing mail. Whatever came next would arrive to a house ready to answer. I slept with my boots by the bed, light off. The morning light crept through my kitchen blinds like a thin blade, soft but unrelenting. On the corkboard above the coffee maker, every document I had gathered, the red seal filing the certified deeds. The USB printouts looked less like clutter and more like a map. My phone chimed with a new email from the assistant DA. It was clear and businesslike they had received my entire packet and were moving from inquiry to pre-filing action. Subpoenas would go out to the developer and to Seraphine for sworn statements. Full restitution and signed admissions could open a diversion path, but only if everything was verified. I jotted the time file number and the ADA's name in my notebook, then forwarded it to Astria with a short line. Process is underway. My heart beat steady. Wary hope anchored not in promises but in procedure was a strange comfort. By mid-morning, I was at the sheriff's substation in Johnson City. The air smelled of copy toner and stale coffee. I gave my statement, calmly handing over the certified timeline and the audio clip where Kellen's partner admitted the dates of the forged transfer. The clerk, a young man with freckles, slid me a document receipt without comment. I thanked him, tucked it into my folder, and walked back to my truck without drama. Relief mixed with gravity. Each signature, each file, each truth pinned down was another inch of fence rebuilt, but not yet a gate closed. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of cedar. Astria called from the courthouse steps. Her voice had a small lift to it, like someone who finally sees the shape of a case. Subpoenas being prepared for Seraphine Klein and Ray Solano, she said. Underwriter just flagged the file uninsurable. That freezes any title action until this is resolved. I wrote the words on my pad in block letters. Tight resolve settled over me, not triumph, not yet, but the steady grip of a rope you finally got hold of. Near dusk, as cicadas started their evening song, my phone buzzed again. Kellen's name lit the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail, but pressed answer. His voice was frayed, the bravado gone. "Mom, I'm drowning." Seraphine's lawyered up. "Ray won't call me back. I can't afford my rent in Austin. Is there any corner on the ranch I can stay for a week?" The question hung between us like a sagging fence wire. I kept my tone even. "We'll discuss conditions, not comfort." My chest ached, but the ache stayed behind my boundaries. This was not the boy who learned to drive the Mustang at my side. This was a man facing consequences of his own making. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table drafting a one-page conditional lodging agreement for the long unused foreman's cottage on the west fence line. It was plain bullet-pointed and mercilessly clear, no tenancy rights. 30-day cap, mandatory restitution plan to Mr. Harrington. Written renunciation of any claim to my assets. Full cooperation with the DA. Weekly counseling with a licensed family therapist. Assigned chores, fence repairs, water line checks tracked on a clipboard. I laid the paper on the table with a pen and an old family Bible. "Sign here, not there," I murmured to myself. Stern justice measured compassion that was the bridge I was willing to build no more. Night had fully settled when Kellen arrived alone. The porch light caught the exhaustion in his eyes. We walked to the cottage together, cicadas rasping like a low drumbeat. Inside, he read each clause aloud. He tried to bargain about the chores. I shook my head. He initialed every page signed at the end and slid the pen back. I handed him an old quilt from my mother's cedar chest, the cottage key, and said, "No lies under my roof, even a temporary one." He nodded no words and stepped inside. Boundary set. Small bridge extended. On his way back out to fetch a bag from his car, he paused at the barn and fixed a sagging hinge without being asked. It was nothing and not nothing. I logged the time on the clipboard, then sat on the porch steps and breathed. Quiet, cautious hope crept in, not as forgiveness, but as a chance for decency to take root if he chose to water it. My phone pinged once more. A DA calendar invite appeared for a joint conference in 72 hours. Subject line, restitution and disposition options. I stood locked the cottage door behind him and then the ranch gate behind me. The night air smelled of cedar and iron. In 3 days we would sit at a table again, not as mother and son, but as parties to a reckoning. The cicadas were already loud as Emily and I climbed the courthouse steps. The air had that tin-hot shimmer that makes everything feel sharper, even your own heartbeat. I had my binder tucked under one arm, pages labeled and tabbed. Emily carried a slim folder of her own, her thumb tapping it like a metronome. We didn't talk on the stairs. Our shoes made small sounds on the stone. Inside, the marble smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and history. This was not a day for show. It was a day for record. The assistant DA opened the meeting with no small talk. He read out case numbers, acknowledged receipt of my packet, and laid the rails for what came next. Pre-filing diversion, he said, is available only if full restitution and sworn admissions occur. Otherwise, charges will be filed within 30 days. He listed the easement title opinions and my prior statements as exhibits. Copies were passed across the table. My hands stayed folded, but I was braced as if against a gust of wind. For the first time in months, I felt a process larger than me pulling this forward. Seraphine was the first to blink. Sitting beside her counsel, she played a saved voicemail on her phone. Her own voice filled the room. "You move the papers. I'll sell the story." She handed over a brief, admitting she knew the documents were suspect eyes fixed on the table. The DA thanked her and slid the paper into a folder marked Cooperation. The moment was cold but clear. Watching it, I realized how many secrets had been carried by women in this story, and how different choices could still be made. Then Emily took her turn. She rose shoulders square and handed over a notarized affidavit dates sightings and the day she helped secure the Mustang, confirming my non-consent. Her voice didn't tremble. The ADA accepted and stamped the copy, nodding once. Pride moved through me like steady current. This was not vengeance. This was the truth laid down in order. When Kellen spoke, the room went still. He admitted the forged transfer, the planned flip, and then the old wound being second to the ranch. His voice cracked. "I wanted power over what I thought stole you from me," he said. He didn't look at me. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He said the words he had dodged for years, and silence pooled around them like water around a fence post. I stayed seated, eyes on the binder heart, on the boy who had once ridden a red bicycle across this same land. The ADA read out the diversion conditions in black ink: full restitution to Mr. Harrington and return of all Sunrise deposits on a schedule. A public apology acknowledging the fraud and my ownership. Written renunciation of any claim to my assets. Verified counseling. 200 hours of community service unrelated to real estate. 0 contact with developers. Immediate cooperation with subpoenas. Kellen signed his counsel, initialing each clause. Justice without spectacle. No one clapped. The sound was only pens, scratching paper. By mid-afternoon, the clerk recorded proof of refund to Mr. Harrington. A link to a posted apology video went live on the county portal. Back home later, I hung a small sign inside the barn: "Mustang not for sale." The words were for me as much as for anyone else. Some losses you mark with a plaque, some recoveries too. Near sunset, my phone buzzed with an email the DA granting deferred prosecution contingent on strict compliance, quarterly reviews, and immediate revocation if any term was breached. We stepped out of the courthouse into heat that finally felt like summer, not fever. Emily laughed at something small, and I felt the tightness in my chest ease. At the foreman's cottage, I reset the 30-day clock, tacked a new chore list, and left a jar of iced tea on the stoop. When Kellen arrived, I told him, "You will never own this land. You may still own your word." He nodded, no promises he couldn't keep, and went inside. Sunset poured over the conserved pasture. Emily pointed to a calf bucking near the fence, its small hooves throwing dust into the light. I touched the Mustang's fender and the easement binder, to keeps memory and future. The gate stayed closed, my table stayed set. Looking back on everything I've shared with you, I see more than a fight over land or money. I see a lesson about boundaries, courage, and the kind of love that holds people accountable. As a mother and as a woman who's worked her whole life, I learned that protecting what you've built isn't selfish. It's an act of stewardship for the next generation. I also learned that compassion and firmness can live in the same heart. Maybe my story reminds you of your own family struggles or a time you had to stand your ground with someone you love. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to draw a hard line to protect your dignity or your legacy? Share your thoughts below. If this video touched your heart, comment 1 or tell me where you're watching from. And if you'd like to hear more true stories of resilience and family, don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you won't miss the next one.